All right, lighting into part 2 already. We're going to be starting this with a license, actually, for Edward Partridge to be the bishop of the church. So basically, it is a piece of paper. And then we get into Doctrine and Covenants section 59, which, fun fact, is also just a piece of paper. We have an earlier copy than what we got out of Revelation Book 1. So the introduction into this license that we see. So again, I am taking my chronology from Documents Volume 1 of the Joseph Smith Papers series. So again, I know there may be other things out there, but what we're doing is constraining ourselves to the Joseph Smith Papers. And what we get here is a single piece of paper that was held in the Partridge family possession until sometime in the 1880s, when it came into the possession of the church historian's office, where it sits to this day. So here you have it. The handwriting is of Sidney Rigdon. And you have the signatures of Joseph Smith, Rigdon, and several others. And we'll get to that in a moment. But there are a lot of people on this. This is not a normal license. It's kind of termed that because that's how it was referred to. But this is very much different than any other licenses than we see from this time period because of all these signatures and other things that are in there. If you flip over the page, you can see it was kind of folded into something you could carry with you, like a letter. And it simply says Bishop's License and the number's 1831. And those are in Edward Partridge's handwriting. So apparently this was written out and then, it was kind of passed around. And I'll get to that in a moment as well. So what is the content of a license? Well, I'll just read it to you again, very brief. It says, "The Church of Jesus Christ, to all whom these presents may come, hereby testifieth that our brother Edward Partridge has been appointed bishop of this church on the 4th of February, 1831, with and by the consent of the whole church, agreeable to the appointment of God, and ordained to this office under the hand of Sidney Rigdon, an elder of this Church of Christ, regularly organized on the 6th of April, 1830, in witness whereof we have hereunto set our hands." And then you get several signatures, as you can see. That's the license. So just letting everybody know, Ed's legit, and so he can do the things that he does. And I would imagine that this would be very important when it came to I'm buying lands in the name of the church. You would definitely need to have some sort of a proof that you weren't making that up, right? So I think a very, very logical thing to do. So from the historical introduction to Documents Volume 1, we get this. This document provided such authority, but its wording, especially its designation as coming from the church itself, does not follow the language of other extant early licenses, including a December 1830 license signifying that Partridge was an elder in the church, meaning even his own other license is different. Other early licenses were signed either by Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery as the first and second elders of the church, respectively, or by those who performed the ordination to the office. But this document was eventually signed by 20 elders, many of whom did not add their signatures until months after Partridge's appointment as bishop. The format of the signatures on the page, in two distinct columns with an empty third one between, suggests that it may have been intended that even more elders would sign the document. And so we really don't know the full reason why this document was made. So further into the historical introduction here, it says, Ezra Booth, who traveled to Missouri at this time, later stated that, quote, "a commandment had instructed Cowdery and others to procure a written recommendation signed by the elders for the purpose of presenting it to the Indian agent in order to obtain permission from him to visit the Indians in their settlements," unquote. Whether Cowdery's recommend or the other recommends mentioned in this revelation were related to that purpose is not clear. But Booth's reference to a recommend signed by the elders suggests something similar to Partridge's document. Partridge was responsible for land purchases in Missouri, and the recommend from the church may have been intended to facilitate his transaction of business on behalf of the church. Neither the document itself nor other contemporaneous documents speak of its original purpose. So again, we don't really know exactly what this is for. But I think what the editors are saying and kind of what I'm saying is again, like, hey, I'm here to buy a farm in the name of some organization, you're going to need some paperwork to show that you're legit, right? So I think that makes sense. Whether it's true or not, I guess we won't know. We filled up as much history as we can. So the signatures were gained over the following year. And the latest that we have, from the time it was received until all the signatures was late January 1832. So this is months in the process. And that was John Whitmer's when he reached Missouri. Footnote 5 to this says, Partridge was appointed bishop by a 4th February 1831 revelation. Not all of the signatories, were even members of the church in February 1831. Neither William W. Phelps nor William E. McClellan, for example, was baptized until summer of 1831. Kind of an interesting footnote there. And there you have it, a license to go bishop. Let's go bishop some stuff. That's what Edward Partridge had, signed by a lot of people. So there you go, kind of a brief one there. Then we're going to light into what we now know as section 59 of the Doctrine and Covenants. So what we get, a first copy of this is actually on a loose piece of paper from the Newell K. Whitney papers, which is now held at the Harold B. Lee Library at BYU, at Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah. It is titled, How to Spend the Day Called Sunday, etc., etc., etc. How to Spend the Day Called Sunday. That is one of the best intros I've had so far on this show. The handwriting is of Oliver Cowdery. The Whitney papers were actually held by that family until Mary Jane Whitney married somebody by the name of Isaac Grew. And it passed in the Grew family until it was donated to the BYU Library sometime between, or I think it was probably a process between 1969 and 1974. We also get a copy found in Revelation Book 1, of course. Text corrections from this and the handwriting itself in the name of John Whitmer. So there's some big strikeouts here and whatnot, but that's all in John Whitmer's hand, kind of correcting himself. And of course, there's verse numbering for publication in the Book of Commandments. So there you go. We also get a copy of this in what's called the Hyde and Smith Notebook. And this is referring to Orson Hyde and Samuel Smith, by the way. And so the handwriting you're seeing here is actually the handwriting of Samuel Smith from a notebook that they had. We also get a copy in the Evening and Morning Star. This one was actually published in July of 1832. So this is a little ways later on. But yeah, it was actually published here right after what would be known now as the Law of the Church, or I believe that's section 42, or is it section 46? I forget off the top of my head. But anyway, those two things are kind of put together. It is chapter 60 in the Book of Commandments, and it is section 19 in the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants. I also found this guy. This is called a broadside, and this was printed in Kirtland. So this would be akin to a periodical. And we still have it. It is found in the Church History Library. So no introduction on this thing. It's just the revelation as it stands, but it's called a broadside. It is the only thing on the page. And so we still have that in our archives in Salt Lake City. There is a copy of this in the Manuscript History of the Church. And there are some pretty significant differences between the current section headings that we have. So again, from the 1981 publication of the Doctrine and Covenants, the section heading says this: preceding this record of this revelation, the prophet writes descriptively of the land of Zion, wherein the people were to be assembled. The land was consecrated, as the Lord had directed, and the site of the future temple was dedicated. The Lord makes these commandments especially applicable to the saints in Zion, unquote. So there you have it. But the current scriptures, or anything post-2013, gives us this, which is quite different. It says, quote, preceding this revelation, the land was consecrated as the Lord had directed, and the site for the future temple was dedicated. On the day this revelation was received, Polly Knight, the wife of Joseph Knight Sr., died, the first church member to die in Zion. Early members characterized this revelation as instructing the saints how to keep the Sabbath and how to fast and pray. Polly Knight, the first saint to die in Zion. And if you forget, Joseph Knight Sr. was a very important force for good in terms of supporting Joseph Smith and the publication of the Book of Mormon. So a name to remember Polly Knight and her husband, Joseph Knight Sr. So you'll see that mentioned here. We'll get to that in a moment. So some introductions to this revelation. This letter that we have, this piece of paper in the Newell K. Whitney, papers collection, if you will. The Oliver Cowdery letter that was written calls it How to Spend the Day, called Sunday, etc., etc. That introduction there is written in Newell K. Whitney's hand. The rest of the body of everything, the whole text, is written in the hand of Oliver Cowdery. Revelation Book 1 says this, 62nd Commandment given in Missouri Independence, Jackson County, August 7th, 1831. Instructing the saints how to keep the Sabbath and how to fast and pray, and what it was, etc., etc. Some dashes there. Man, they love etc. back then. They just can't get enough of it. Anyway, Hyde and Smith, their notebook gives a revelation given in the land of Zion. And y'all can copy-paste that into the Book of Commandments and Doctrine and Covenants. Pretty much the exact same thing, very brief. And we get nothing on the broadside, like I said before. It just lights right into the document, nothing for it. The Evening and Morning Star simply gives us commandment for keeping the Sabbath, etc. etc. Anyway. And it's given, like I said, it's interesting if you take a look at this page. It's right under, more or less, the law, as we have it there. So they were put together in that, what we would call newspaper, the periodical that the church had put out. All right, the manuscript history gives us a lot more than this. So it says, on the 3rd day of August, I proceeded to dedicate the plot spot for the temple. A little west of Independence was dedicated in, and there were present of 8 men, among whom were myself, Sidney Rigdon, Edward Partridge, William W. Phelps, Oliver Cowdery, Martin Harris, and Joseph Coe. The 87th Psalm was read, and the scene was solemn and impressive. On the 4th, I attended the first conference in the land of Zion. It was held at the house of Brother Joshua Lewis in Caw Township, in the presence of the Colesville branch of the church. The Spirit of the Lord was there. On the 7th, I attended the funeral of Sister Polly Peck Knight, the wife of Joseph Knight Sr. This was the first death of the church in this land, and I can say a worthy member sleeps in Jesus till the resurrection. I also received the following revelation given in Zion, August of 1831. So very high praise for Polly Knight, and I'm sure there will be later for Joseph Knight Sr. because they were a massive influence on the success of the early church. So the 87th Psalm was read. It says this, a psalm or song for the sons of Korah. His foundation is in the holy mountains. The Lord loveth the gates of Zion more than all the dwellings of Jacob. Glorious things are spoken of thee, O city of God, Selah. I will make mention of Rahab and Babylon to them that know me. Behold, Philistia and Tyre and Ethiopia, this man was born there. And of Zion it shall be said, this and that man was born in her, and the highest himself shall establish her. The Lord shall count, when he writeth up the people, that this man was born there, Selah. As well the singers as the players on instruments shall be there. All my springs are in thee. So definitely referring to how wonderful it will be to say that you're from Zion, right? Again, the 87th Psalm from the Old Testament. So that was read off during this episode. So there you go. Now we're going to get into the historical introduction. This is from the editors of Documents, Volume 1. So at the time, and you're going to see a lot of this about, why are we talking about the Sabbath day and what gives about all this stuff that we're doing. So many of the inhabitants that were already there, so this is pre-Latter-day Saints showing up, were actually from the south of the United States. And many of them were probably evading the law. So it was a rough place to be in. And so we get a couple of descriptions here. It says, a later Joseph Smith history characterizes many of the residents as the, quote, basest of men, who had fled from the face of civilized society into the frontier country to escape the hand of justice in their midnight revels, their Sabbath breaking, horse racing, and gambling. A traveler to western Missouri in 1833 made a similar observation, stating that, Quote, the only indication of it being Sunday in the area was the unusual gambling and noise and assemblies around taverns. I love that. Sabbath day observance, however, was an important component of worship to many members of the Church of Christ, perhaps because of the general non-observance of the Sabbath among the inhabitants of Jackson County. The 7th of August revelation emphasized the importance of keeping the Sabbath day holy, outlining the church members should do what church members should do on that day. These guidelines filled a void that neither the Articles and Covenants of the Church nor the February 1831 revelation giving the laws of the Church of Christ had addressed, thereby providing direction to those who would be building up the city of Zion without the benefit of Joseph Smith's in-person leadership. Therefore, I conclude, again, amateur historian, that the reason in the Evening and Morning Star that you have a law and then you have this one is they're kind of one. They're kind of like, okay, here's a law of the church, but then here's some stuff about how to do the Sabbath day. All very important if you're going to be a Latter-day Saint. So, my opinion, why they were put together. What do I know? Anyway, footnote 4 to this says, according to one history of independence, the first clerk of the circuit court even left the town because of the, quote, rough exterior and uncultivated manners of the people, unquote. So they like drove out a county court clerk. I think that's great. That's how bad it was here, perceptively. I don't know. Anyway, so kind of fun. Really rough and tumble. It's like the pirates from Peter Pan. Anyway, whatever. Not really the best place to live, let's just say. So continuing on, historical introduction. The revelation may have also been a response to the concerns of those who had gone to Missouri and felt daunted by the task of building up Zion in a region described by one observer as containing only, quote, 2 or 3 merchant stores and 15 or 20 dwelling houses built mostly of logs hewed on both sides. In fact, the writer Washington Irving, who traveled through Independence in 1832 on an expedition with federal Indian commissioners, also commented on the, quote, rougher and rougher life he encountered as he got closer to the town, while his traveling companion Charles Latrobe described Independence as full of promise, but containing nothing but a ragged congeries of 5 or 6 rough log huts, 2 or 3 clapboard houses, 2 or 3 so-called hotels, alias grog shops, and a few stores. Perhaps to encourage the saints in such conditions, the revelation promised the bounties of the earth to the church members and reminded them to express gratitude to God. So this is a pretty rough place, and you can imagine the saints coming here being like, wow, this is it, you know? Like, this is it. There's all these, like, lean-tos and huts, and people are crazy around here, and they're all evading the law and whatnot. And I imagine it's probably very similar to how the saints felt when they got to the Salt Lake Valley, and they saw there was one tree, and it was dead. So they were like, this is the one, and again, they made it blossom, and it was a wonderful thing. So anyway. So not maybe the best place to live at the time. So let's talk about Polly Knight for a little bit. The historical introduction gives us this about her. It says, the revelation assured heavenly rewards for the obedient who would die in Zion, prompted perhaps by the death on the morning of the 7th of August of Polly Peck Knight, the 57-year-old wife of Joseph Knight Sr. and a friend of Joseph Smith and his family. Polly Knight had traveled to Missouri with the Colesville Saints, but after falling ill, she became, quote, the first death in the church in this land. It is unclear whether this revelation was dictated before or after Joseph Smith was informed of her death. So yeah, she was 57 at the time, which I imagine for 1831 is a fairly healthy life for what life expectancy was back then. So the copy that we have, the copy that we're using, this original copy that we have, it says the copy featured here belonged to Newell K. Whitney and is also in Cowdery's handwriting. Whitney's copy may be the original, but is more likely a fair copy. It was likely made for him sometime after Cowdery returned to Ohio at the end of August. Around that same time, John Whitmer copied the Revelation into Revelation Book 1. That there are few differences between the two copies suggests that they were made around the same time or from the same copy. So they would call these rough notes for a rough copy, and then you would make a fair copy that wouldn't have all those sort of distinctions in it. And what I find interesting is the Revelation Book 1 version of this, again, very little of that. It's a very clean copy, if you will. So they were definitely working off of some other text. Footnote 2 to this states, this revelation may have resulted in part from a desire to know what rewards such individuals would obtain. The statement, quote, trouble me no more concerning this matter, which appears in the closing portion of the revelation, suggests that the revelation came as a response to inquiry on the part of Joseph Smith or others with him. What those are, we may not know. So let's get into the content and the footnotes here. So the revelation gives us, a little further in says, and that thou mayest more fully keep thyself unspotted from the world, thou shalt go to the house of prayer and offer up thy sacraments upon my holy day. For verily this day is a day appointed unto you to rest from your labors and to pay thy devotions unto the Most High. Footnote 9 to this says, the Articles and Covenants previously instructed members to meet together oft to partake bread and wine in remembrance of the Lord Jesus. But this revelation appears to be the first time that partaking of the Lord's Supper is specifically associated with Sunday worship. So if you want to kind of trace that back, you will wind up in section 59 here. Further in, the text gives us, the beasts of the fields, and the fowls of the air, and that which climbeth upon the trees, and walketh upon the earth, yea, the herb and the good things which cometh of the earth, whether for food or for raiment, or for houses, or for barns, or for orchards, or for gardens, or for vineyards, yea, all things which cometh of the earth in the season thereof, is made for the benefit and the use of man, both to please the eye and to gladden the heart, yea, for food and for raiment, for taste and for smell, to strengthen the body and to enliven the soul, and it pleaseth God that he hath given all these things unto man, for unto this end were they made, to be used with judgment, not to excess, neither by extortion. So the footnote to this, footnote 13. A May 31 revelation explained that, quote, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the air and that which cometh of the earth is ordained for the use of man, for food and for raiment, and that he might have an abundance, unquote. After hearing reports in Kirtland, Ohio, from those who had traveled to Missouri, Elizabeth Goodkin Marsh explained that common game in Missouri consisted of deer turkeys, prairie hens, rabbit, and gray squirrels. She also reported that the state had an abundance of wild plums, wild sweet grapes, mulberries, strawberries, raspberries, and blackberries. Hazelnut, hickory nuts, and etc. are too numerous to mention. So apparently there was a lot to gain from the land that they were going in Missouri, and that's one of the reasons why apparently this was stated. Now, this is a very interesting, maybe, I don't know if this is unique to Latter-day Saints, but this idea that, like, yeah, all the stuff in this earth is meant for the use of man, but you are not to use it by excess, and you are not to extort. And so there's definitely this, it's like, you're not like the boss man and you can do whatever you want with it. Like, you are to use it with skill and to a specific purpose. So it's not just free for all. So this whole idea of like that Adam is the Lord of the earth and names the animals and so forth and so on, I think in many cases might have been taken a little too far. So it's interesting in this revelation kind of reins that in somewhat. So kind of an interesting footnote there. Oliver adds a notation at the very end of this, says, given by Joseph the translator and written by Oliver Cowdery, August 7, 1831, in the land of Zion. Footnote 14 to this says, this notation by Cowdery may have been part of the original manuscript, because Samuel Smith included this same notation in his copy. It is not, however, in the copy made by John Whitmer in Revelation Book 1, nor is it included in the version published in the July 1832 issue of the Evening and the Morning Star. And so that's how you get all that you get from, section 58 and 59. And that, my friends, concludes part 2 and concludes this episode. So we've got 4 documents here, some interesting things. Like I said, last episode that we had was really long with a bunch of stuff in it, but hopefully this was a little bit easier to palate. Some very interesting things, though. Where does Sabbath day and sacrament sort of come together and lock together? Something that we do today in the church. That is enumerated here. Also, I just find it interesting that they sort of showed up in Independence, and this was a rough joint with a lot of people they did not want to be associating with. And so kind of a tension there. And later on in church history, you will know, like, these particular saints never built a temple in Independence. There is a temple in Independence, Missouri today, which is the Community of Christ, and it's a very gorgeous building. I have actually never been there myself, but it's very, very pretty. And there's some other offshoot groups that are there as well. And so that's what you have currently to this day. So a little bit about the early days of Independence, Missouri. So hope you've been enjoying it. We'll be continuing on with some more filling in the history later. I am the amateur historian saying, enjoy a really great week.